one.
Welcome to the latest California Library Association Ursula Meyer Advocacy Fund Training Series. And if you think that's easy to say in one breath, try it 3 times and there will be no midterm. Delighted to have you, those of you who are live here on the session with us. And if you're watching this on the CLA YouTube channel, delighted that you found it and that you know that we have these recordings out there. We always start off with this one slide, which is about the only slide we're going to use for the whole presentation. It's up here for one reason and one reason only, to let you know what the background is and how to keep up with us. So I'm going to stop talking for 30 seconds. It'll be about the only 30 seconds of silence you get today, and then we're going to dive into today's topic. I don't have a stopwatch on. I don't know if that was a full 30 seconds, but as you see there, if you want to keep up with us, we will be posting more events very soon. We're in August now of 2024 as we record this, and we've got things pretty much booked up through January, February. So those will start going on the events calendar over the next week or two, and we hope you'll come back. Again, if you missed something or if you want, especially in today's session where we're going to cover a lot of material, but it's also going to be highly interactive. If you want to go back, you just go to the CLA YouTube channel. You'll find this and other recordings there, and there's a playlist for it. Finally, if you like what you see, and we hope you do, we can always use additional funding. We're pretty well funded up front, but we always want to make sure that we keep the funds rolling to keep these going. So if you care to make a donation to support this and share that with your friends, you'll find that link down there to the CLA site for making donations in support of this program. That's as far as we're going to go with commercials. Let us get rid of the slide. Let us come back to the panel members or the participants we have in today's workshop. And as we start talking about the idea of writing effectively as an advocate, we want to try to get down to the essence of it. So let's take the topic to its essence, and that's one word: passion. If you have passion, your writing is going to flow. There's a lot of stuff you'll do to cut it and to edit it and make it go. But passion is, from my point of view, what makes a librarian who starts a 2,000 square foot library in a rural community passionate enough to advocate for her community. I heard her speak last January. This would be January of 2024 at the American Library Association LibLearnX conference. And she was talking about how she feels like legislators are out of touch with what's going on in her community and what makes her passionate. They're out there talking about book bans and whether something should be on the shelf. They're talking about all these other things that they think are important to the constituents. She says, let me tell you what's important to my community. We are 2 hours away from the nearest Walmart. We are 2 hours away from the nearest Target. We are 2 hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to do something, you drive 2 hours. In our community, it's the library, probably a post office, and the little number of people that live there in that 2,000 square foot library she has. Just, legislators, you want to know what's important to us? Don't worry about book bans. Look at the kids who come to my library, and among the things they get are snacks and food. My biggest concern at the end of the day, and this is her talking still, at the end of my day on a Friday, my biggest concern is, where are those children going to get their next meal until the library opens next Monday? That's passion. As we've heard in some of our CLA library, our Ursula Meyer's advocacy training sessions, passion is what makes our colleague Derek Wolfgram here in the San Francisco Bay Area hear that Proud Boys are going to come and try to disrupt a drag queen story time in his library. So instead of just sitting inside the library and hoping things work out, he walks out into the parking lot and meets the Proud Boys before they even get in the building. And he engages them in a 90-minute conversation about what's important to them and what's important to him, to the library and the community. The program goes on. They didn't try to change each other's minds, but they had a discussion because Derek was passionate enough to meet them on his turf, on their terms, and have a conversation so that the program could go on and they could have an exchange. That's the kind of passion we want to capture when we're telling stories and writing about our activities. Another one from an Ursula Meyer series last fall, and again, you can find all these things on YouTube if you want to go back and hear the stories from these people themselves. But we had some people talking about freedom to read and the disruptions for programs that were to groups like the LGBTQIA+, and I have to look down to remember all the initials here and get them right. But disruptions of programs like that, and the librarians involved go to their city council to explain what happened. And they're shocked because the city council says, not only do we support you, but we want you doing more of that kind of programming. And the librarian said, we'd love to, but we don't have the money for that. And they said, well, we're going to do a budget supplement. We'll give you money so you can do monthly programming. That's passion. And finally, earlier this year, I think it was in February or March of 2024, we had librarians from the Monrovia Public Library here in California talking about how they took grant money to start a veterans center in their library to serve that part of their community. And they were so passionate and so literate about how they went about it that when the grant funds ran out, they found other funding, and they continue it to this day. That is the passion and the kind of storytelling that we want to get to. And that's what we're going to be exploring today. So I did, for those of you watching the archived version, full disclosure here, the people that are on the call came in a little bit early, and we had a discussion around some of the issues they're facing. So I had planned, even before I knew who would be with us today, to ask an important question. And I would ask you also, if you're watching the recording, pause it for a minute, answer this question for yourself, and then come back and listen to what they say. For those of you here live today, let's establish, before we talk about how you write to describe these things, what's important to you. So 4 of you have wonderful stories. Anyone that wants to go first, talk about what's important to you in advocacy. And then let's look at how we can write that as part of our workshop. So who wants to go first?
Well,
Repeat go ahead.
Everybody wants to go first. Yeah.
I'm writing my jumbled thoughts down first, and then I'll go.
Yeah. Okay, repeat the question again, Paul.
Yeah, please. What's important to you? What are you passionate about in advocacy? Let's identify the issue, because that's what we're going to workshop together.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think Amrit was actually about to start. You want to go?
Right.
Well, I'm a big believer in, our silence will not save us. So it's important to be vocal about what our needs are, be vocal about what we do. There's so many books about books, books on the work of library workers and the things they see and the number of issues they deal with in a day and the range of issues. And their creative responses to addressing all those issues. It just makes us people who have a really unique insight into what people in our communities face. And I think it would be a shame to be silent about that.
That goes so much further than I expected. Thank you, Amrit. What I was trying to do here is prime the pump and say, so let's identify the passions, and let's get down to the actual physical act of writing. But one of the first physical acts of writing is to get your initial tagline that is so compelling. People want to stay with you. And for those of you on the session, as well as those of you at home, write down what we heard her say up front. Our silence will not save us. Yeah. Think about the power of that one simple sentence. If you're passionate about libraries or intellectual freedom or sharing resources in the community, the line, our silence will not save us, is a wonderful opening, because it does two things. It says, yeah, I believe that too. And the second thing immediately is, well, you're saying this because maybe it's at risk here. What's going on? And I want to know more. Who's being silent? What do we have to save ourselves and our communities from? So if we're going to get down to writing and workshopping, Amrit just handed us on a silver platter the kind of thing we look for in any writing we do. The opening line that is so compelling, it builds a connection between us and our audience, or our potential audience, and a call to action, which is implied here. She doesn't say our silence is in danger, or the world is about to end, or if you elect this candidate, it's going to cause World War VI.5. We're not going down that fear path. Amrit's statement is a wonderful, positive statement that says, I've got something to talk about, and I hope you'll listen. Our silence will not save us. So hold that thought. We're going to workshop that further as we go into this, Amrit. Who wants to go next?
Well, we can't follow that.
Yeah, you can. Okay. Well, here's what we'll do. All right. Amrit was number 1. Number 2, well, we can't follow that. So who wants to be number 3?
I'd like to build on that a little bit, actually.
Thank you, Sarah.
Because it made me think a lot about my high school years. And I remember having this really passionate government teacher who was like, you have to be involved. This is how you do it. And she was young and spunky and had all this energy. And I remember thinking, like, I don't have that kind of time. I'm just a high school student. And then at some point towards the end of the semester, the entire class turns 18. We all register to vote. And she hands out these bumper stickers that I just remember holding on to forever because it spoke to me. And it said, democracy is not a spectator sport. And it's about being involved. It's not something you can just watch. It's not something that you can just talk about around the dinner table. It's about bringing meaning to that conversation and bringing knowledge to that conversation and being involved. And it's about making noise. So like something about that just clicked for me. And I remember thinking like, I want to keep this going. I want to keep this conversation rolling. And I ended up studying politics as part of my bachelor's, and I ended up getting more involved with each step of my education. And like, I feel like as a generation, younger people are becoming more aware as information becomes more accessible. And I think that's closely related to the involvement of libraries within our society.
You guys are too good. I have to split the fee for today's session with all of you because you're just outdoing me on anything I could do. Sarah has given us two possible things. And before I even go into the themes that I identified there, think for a minute. If you're watching the recording here, go back for about a minute or two after I do this quick debrief and watch exactly what I'm describing and see how well she did it. Sarah got us into that story quickly. She did not waste a word. Probably didn't take more than a minute or two for her to tell that story. And in it, she gave us two ideas. One, democracy is not a spectator sport. If we're looking for a lead on an advocacy piece, rough draft number one off the top of my head, based on what Sarah said, we could start off a piece that's in writing saying, democracy is not a spectator sport. A high school teacher reminded me when he handed me a bumper sticker. Think about that. That's like, wow, you started advocating when you were a high school student and it was because of a bumper sticker and it was because of a high school teacher who did that. There's a lot packed into that. The second thing is she could twist that a little bit and say something along the lines of, my advocacy began when my high school teacher gave me a bumper sticker saying, and then you have that quote. Again, it pulls you in and it talks about the importance of just one line. The sticker itself is a great slogan and it could tie into any number of advocacy campaigns. So our challenge as we workshop this would be take that wonderful general theme and work into a specific advocacy effort that we're going to do as a result of our conversation today. Sarah, any feedback or follow-up you want to add before we move on to another person?
I don't have anything at this time.
That's beautiful. You said it all. Who wants to go third? No, actually, who wants to go fourth now that we've had three?
I can.
Okay.
Mine doesn't sound as great. That's what makes me. It's like when I wrote, what am I passionate about? People in traditionally low-income neighborhoods deserve nice things. My community, and I'm very selfish, just my community, deserves a top-tier award-winning library that's clean, comfortable, innovative, and state-of-the-art. And they deserve to have it in their neighborhood. And I'm passionate about that because I'm in a multi-neighborhood system. And some libraries are frankly nicer than others. And we deserve in my neighborhood to be one of the nice ones. In short, poor people deserve nice things.
You've got a variety of ways you can go, and it depends on your audience. You may take the general thing of people deserve nice things as a general reaching out to a large-based audience as the beginning of your pitch. Or if you're writing to people in your neighborhood that you know are from lower economic groups, you might say, poor people deserve nice things too. But I love overall the essence of what I heard with the opening line of people deserve nice things like a great library. Mm-hmm. Because then you're setting the pitch for, we need to replace the library we have with something better. And it's not for us, folks, it's for you. We're drawing you in because you deserve this, and we want to partner with you. We want to be your collaborators in producing something positive and wonderful because we deserve it. I'm going to go 2 for 1 with Nicole, because still something that we did together 20 years ago, I think now, when we were at a conference, and Nicole was supposed to come up with her colleagues at this conference. She was a library school student at that point, supposed to come up with a project that they would pitch at their libraries. And she pitched the Baby Andrew Project, which I thought was so lovely that to this day, I continue to use it. Let's get that out as a second example. Nicole, could you summarize the initiative for Baby Andrew?
So Baby Andrew was inspired by one of my co-collaborators in this group. She's a military wife. And she said every time her son and her husband go to a new library, new set town, they have to refill all their paperwork, including a library card. So we're like, why isn't your library card number like your social security number? Why can't it just go with you? You get it at birth, and every time she goes to a new city, all she has to say is, my son's library card number is X, and he is automatically a member of that library. Since libraries are such an American institution, it should not be hard. You shouldn't have to re-up every time. So that was the inspiration for the project. And,
Every
that,
time
and her son's name was Andrew. So that's what we called it, the Baby Andrew Project.
Every time I see Nicole, I go, so how's the Baby Andrew initiative? And we keep laughing about the idea that some people are actually looking at this, and it may take a lifetime to get us there. But again, it's the passion behind what drives us and pulls us together with the people to whom we're writing, and more importantly, to whom we want to collaborate. Thank you. Robin, anything you want to throw in there?
Let me get generated. Well, first of all, Amory and Nicole, thanks for sharing that. And I'm just going to riff off Sarah a little bit. First of all, great story. And I was thinking of my community and where I want to start with this advocacy plan. And I was thinking of a writing campaign. So that's why the timing of this workshop, Paul, for me was perfect. But I was thinking, I live in a community that is solidly middle class, probably more upper middle class. And I think we have a lot of, and I don't want to say what city, although I think I blew it already in case people watch the recording. But I think they're a little empathetic, like they just kind of moved into their nice home and swim in their pool. And if things are going bad, well, that's just, I guess, the way it is. And I love where I live, but I just don't see a lot of advocacy in our community on about anything. And Sarah, your story reminded me that I can start with reaching out to the older people in our community, remind them about being active and that democracy is important at all levels, and just kind of encourage them to get involved and give them the reasons why, even if it doesn't affect them. And I think that's part of the empathy of older generation, is that it doesn't affect me. I don't use the library, or I don't use a skateboard park, or fill in the blank. But it's for the greater good. And I just think I can build on that story. And I don't have a catchy byline or anything, but I'm just inspired by all three of you, and you too, Paul, on just the beginning baby steps of this. And yeah, that's what my thought was.
Well, thank you. And for those of you that heard her say, I can't even remember the last sentence you just said about I don't have a specific thing or a great catch line.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
But it was something along the line of, I don't think I've got a great catch line. And this is part of what this whole workshop's about. We listen to ourselves and have people take notes for us to realize we have a lot of great catch lines, but we don't catch them. And Robin's great catch line to start off generically was, that's just the way, I'm going to reframe it a little bit, but she used the phrase, that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is, doesn't have to be the way it is.
Correct.
That's a great starting point, because again, it points out that maybe we've gotten a little bit blasé about the possibilities we have, about our ability to be involved in positive change efforts, about our ability to communicate that in writing and in spoken language. If we say that's just the way it is, doesn't have to be the way it is, we're identifying a barrier to our activity and an invitation to say, so what is it that doesn't have to be the way it is so we can change it? And that would become Robin's challenge as we go through the workshop today. Think of one thing that doesn't have to be the way it is, and start off with your line. That's just the way it is, doesn't have to be the way it is. For example, in our neighborhood, we have this problem where we don't have enough skateboarding parks. We don't have enough facilities for senior citizens. We don't have whatever it is. So the first line is the catcher. The second line is the statement of the problem. The third line is how we can resolve it. And the fourth line is the invitation, which, by the way, is a summary of where we're going to go today in 4 steps to writing your pitches. Amrit.
I may add, I heard a second line in what Robin said, which was I didn't write it down immediately, but it was something about the greater good. Do you remember, Robin?
Yes. I think I was referring to creating a sensitivity or some empathy or an understanding or a respect for the fact that if something's good, it's good. And you may not benefit from it directly, but if it's for the greater good, it's good. And that's a mindset I think that I wanted to kind of play around with too.
How about libraries, good for the greater good?
I hope you're all jotting this down. This is material for you to use. Nicole.
Thank you.
Because I have auditory processing disorder, I'm actually reading the transcript. What was said, which I think is really good, even if it doesn't affect me then, I think that's a part of the empathy for the older generation. I don't use the library or I don't use the skate part, but it's for the greater good. And
Thanks,
so I like the
Nicole.
part of, it's a part of the empathy and for the older generations. We can even add younger generations or future generations to that.
Mm-hmm.
You'll feel the lightning bolts just shooting off your heads. And that includes those of you who are watching this going, man, I wish I'd been in the live version of this one. We start off with the concept of what are you passionate about? Because that's going to direct our writing. Then we get into looking for some of the taglines and pulling them out, even where the speaker, him or herself, doesn't realize that there's a tagline like, that's just the way it is, doesn't have to be the way it is. And then we get into the mechanics of saying, oh, I don't remember exactly how I said it. Nicole jumps in and says, because of the situation I'm in, I've got the transcript in front of me, which reminds us that when we're engaged in this, we have wonderful technology tools that we can be using. And if we are not incorporating those technology tools into our writing and into our other efforts, we're kind of behind the times. And we need to ask ourselves, why am I wasting time doing that when I could be letting something like AI help me out or a transcription service help me out? So part of what we need to be doing when we're writing our pitches is also asking, what technology can I use that will help me to hone this? A lot of my colleagues who are writers are using AI to run their rough drafts through it and get some cleanup. Or they're running ideas into AI and saying, if I were going to do this kind of lesson, what would be 5 points to hit? And when it's good, it's really good at giving them guidance. The warning here is you want to remember that there are still some problems with AI, including the fact that it does what's called hallucination. It will make stuff up. So what you don't want to do is go into AI and say, give me 10 articles on how people in their communities try to change things to make them better than they were, because you might end up with 10 citations that are not real. So if you're going to use AI at that level, go and check the sources and make sure they're real. Or if they're not real, use some of those keywords to track down real articles, because that's a useful tool I've done. Get these fake articles it comes up with, say, oh, I didn't know about those keywords. Let me try that. And invariably, I'll find articles that are real by having used those keywords. But the transcription service that Nicole talked about can be an essential part of our writing. And we have to put our egos aside and say, not every word has to come out of my hands. It's collaborative. And whether it's the 5 of us plus Karen who are on this call collaborating to come up with themes, those of you who will look at this later say, I had those 5 collaborators and now I can do this myself and I can bring in AI. We need to pull those tools in. So again, thank you all for what we've done just at the introductory level of saying what goes into writing an effective advocacy pitch or piece to bolster our audience and to draw in our potential audience. Questions or comments before I dive into a quick overview from my side, and then we're going to workshop it. Anybody?
Just a note that I'm summarizing in the chat if anybody wants to copy and paste to add to their own notes.
I'm worried it's possible and likely that people watching the archived version won't see the chat. Do you mind reading that comment? It's very good.
Yeah, so this is a summary of what we just covered. It's pro tip number 1. The question is, what are you passionate about? And the tip is, have a good opening line that draws from that passion. Some examples from our participants. Our silence will not save us. As librarians, we have unique insight into the needs of our community, and it would be a shame to keep that information from you. Another example, democracy is not a spectator sport. It said on a bumper sticker a high school teacher gave me. 3, people deserve nice things, like a great library. We want to build this with you because you deserve it. Another example, libraries are an American institution. Also, that's just the way it is, but it doesn't have to be. For example, in my neighborhood, insert facts. And finally, libraries, good for the greater good.
Okay, you already know if you're watching the archive version, and for those of you in the live version, this is probably not like any other workshop you've ever been in, where there's a slide deck and we go through an organized pattern of here's this thought, and now you do a discussion on it. Here's this thought, now you do a discussion. At the end of it, you get a bunch of bullet points on the screen. Rita's just given us the end of the workshop summary for up to this point. She put it into chat for those of us that are in the session, and she read it into the recording for those who are watching it. Now, I don't have an exact timing on the recording here. It looks like to me we're about 20 or 25 minutes into the recording. So if you want to go back and get that summary about 25 minutes into this, you can go back and there it is. Again, pointing out that writing these days is such a fascinating experience because you have so many different resources. You have Zoom recordings of sessions like this. You have all kinds of articles online. You have all kinds of videos, including the CLA Ursula Meyer's archive of well over 24 sessions now on all kinds of different advocacy things. You want to know about writing? After today's session, go look up 5 tips on writing on YouTube and see what you come up with. Look for some articles on the internet from decent writers about 5 things they do to make their writing effective. Or just keep watching this session and participating in it, and we're going to hit some of that stuff ourselves. It's a lovely time we live in, filled with lots of possibilities. And it's a theme that just comes up in almost every bit of work I do. It's always our key guidance here, and our key strength is to remember we are not alone. If we are trying to do something like write better advocacy pieces, we know great advocates. You have Nicole, you have Amrit, you have Robin, you have Sarah, you have your colleagues in the California Library Association on the Advocacy and Legislation Committee. They can help you with this stuff. You have your peers in CLA, which is why we're so anxious to have all of you join us as members in CLA, because the more of you there are, the stronger we are and the greater resources we have. There are those American Library Association conferences that we all go to, or many of us go to. I come back from those things just full of ideas, some of them actually quite usable. It's fun, it's encouraging, but it's a reminder that we're not alone. So thank you, Amrit, for the summary. Any other questions or comments before we move into the next phase of this? Nicole, you're not going to ask for members?
No, I can't. That's a conflict of interest, but I can ask for money. And if we were in person, I'd pass the hat like a black church. So it's like, I do have to say, for people who are listening on YouTube, who are watching us later, CLA is a very healthy organization. We're like the blonde on that show, Two Broke Girls. We are endowment rich and like general fund slim, but we do use our money wisely. We do not have a high overhead. We make sure everything like this goes smooth. Thank you, Karen, in the background, who hasn't said a word. And Ursula Meyer's is an endowment, and it was given to us. And Paul is so kind to do these presentations and things for us so that they are free of charge to you through CLA. So, but if we want this to go on indefinitely, we do need some money to go back into the endowment, because Paul is fabulous and he is not paid what he's worth, but he is still not free. So
we may have
these
to
type
edit it
of
down. I don't want
so
to
these are the type of things.
Thank you.
So these are the things that's like, I want everybody to like just appreciate as you're looking at this online and as you're here. See the link, email me. I will send you the link in Brown at oaklandlibrary.org. Because if you appreciate this and you want to keep it going, and you want to keep it going for future generations, because it may not be for today or tomorrow, but money never lasts forever, please come and, put a little something in the kitty. We would greatly appreciate that. And become a member if you want, or just put your dues in the kitty.
Thank you for the pitch, as well as another prime example of what we're getting to today. How do you write a pitch to people? Nicole laid it right out there. You want to have more advocacy training? We need you to support CLA. You could do that by donating to CLA. You could do it by a variety of other methods. But the point is, we need your participation. And that's how you start to craft things. I find it, I know a lot of writers who do this. The first draft, you just bang it out as if you're telling somebody. You picture the person you're trying to speak to, and then you just type whatever comes into mind as your first story. Then you go back and you craft it, you edit it, you go for that great first line that we were looking for, like our silence will not save us, or that's just the way it is. Doesn't have to be the way it is. You look for that in your first draft and you hone and hone and hone. All right, so let's get down to some mechanical things here. In writing, there's a variety of things that we're looking at. And although each has its own style, its own format, and its own strengths and weaknesses, there are things that flow through them. And the consistencies are a good, strong intro line that pulls us in. And then, in case people are taking notes, let me stop there. First thing is a good, strong intro line. Second thing is an explanation of what that problem is caused by. And again, a line or two. I'm not talking about a book here. Third thing is a proposed solution. And the final thing is the invitation to be part of that solution. That's your advocacy pitch. So let's look at a few different formats. Very common one these days, emails. Think about the format of an email. The header, the subject line. A subject line that says CLA wants your help or CLA wants your dollars isn't going to go very far. Everybody wants your dollars. I want your dollars. Nicole's already said, none of us are paid what we want to get. We'd like to have your dollars.
No, you're not paid what you deserve. You're very kind to us, and I thank you.
Thank you. But instead of saying CLA wants your money, maybe something that says you're not making as much as you deserve might get people's attention. And if that in your email leads to something about why we want to get a higher base salary for everybody, or why we want to have lunch in the library for kids, and that's going to help us through donations to pay the people that manage those services so they can do them more effectively, your pitch doesn't start in the first line of your email. Your pitch actually starts in the header to the email. So your writing starts with, when you know what you're going for, you have a compelling 5 to 10 line subject head that makes somebody want to open that and read it and say, oh, that affects me and the people I love. What am I going to do about it? And until you have that, you don't have your header. So with emails, strong, good lead. And then the first line of your email, like any other pitch we're going to do, has to line out exactly what's at stake. And as I said, the problem, the proposed solution, and why you're there. Keep them short. Nobody wants to read a 4 or 5 page email. Your email is your introduction, your invitation to the dance. And that's what you want to do. And you want to make it engaging. A lot of people don't do this. But
I do. If
Go
I
ahead.
could just say, except for me, I must
All
be
right.
the last person on earth who loves a good 5-page email with lots of adverbs and adjectives.
Yeah.
Last person on earth.
I tend to write longer emails than I should, but I'm always conscious of the fact that after the first couple lines, if I don't have somebody, they're gone and I'm gone and I'm dead in the water. So kudos to you that you mastered that. Some of us still struggle with it, but we know at least that's a theory. And what I was going to add is, I don't think a lot of us do this, but embedding a good photograph that pumps up your case into an email can be a very effective thing. If I send you an email saying we need to feed 5,000 children in our neighborhood at our neighborhood library this year or this week because they're not getting adequate food at home, that's one thing. If I show you a picture of some of the children in the library happily having food with the librarian and their parents, or something that implies community and inclusion, that goes a long way in making that message really important. So if you can find ways to embed a good, effective picture that builds on your thing, it doesn't just copy it, but it draws people in and gives them the literal 1,000 words in one picture around your email. You're doing something a lot of people don't do, and it could raise the results that you see. Social media posts. Let's talk quickly about Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok, although there's still a lot more out there. Facebook started off, as you all know, as something where teenagers were talking to other teenagers on college campuses, and then it became much, much more. Over the years, we've seen it evolve so that some people think it's the devil's spawn and they want nothing to do with it. Some people, like me, think that even though it's not my favorite platform, it's a place where I engage with people I can't engage with in other places. Some of my peeps literally are only on Facebook if they're on social media. So if I want to interact with them, I better interact with them there. And it doesn't mean that it all has to be what I had for dinner last night or where I'm going on vacation next month or any of that stuff. I can, in a meaningful way, share things that are meaningful to me, that inspire action. And I do a lot of that. My attitude toward Facebook changed a lot about 6 or 7 years ago when the political situation, this situation changed. And from my point of view, it was not a pleasant change. A lot of other people thought, well, that's a great change. And that's why we've gone the way we've gone in some of our elections. Let us always remember, when we feel like we were losers, somebody else was a winner, and they're reveling in that. We have to be empathetic to that and understanding of that. So what we don't want to do is call names or just try to shame people. What we do want to do is try to stimulate conversations so we can find the common ground. And when you do social media posts, that's what you're looking for. Things that inspire conversation. Remember, and I say this over and over again, it's such a goofy thing, but two people talk about social media and they forget the word social. That implies interaction. I think in libraries, it's still the case in many libraries where we see Facebook and all these other things as a place to put out something, announcing an event or rallying people to do something, and it's one-way broadcast. If you make it two-way or multi-way conversation where you invite reactions and you actually have people carrying on meaningful, not trollish, but meaningful conversations as a result of your post, you're contributing something. So let's get down to specifics. Facebook, you want to get people involved in an advocacy project you're on? Within the constraints of what you can do as an individual, as opposed to what you can do on the company time, where you have to be careful about what you say on behalf of your library. You want to put something out that gives somebody a ground-breaking idea, something they can latch onto, and the invitation to be part of it. So you're writing for content, sharing a link to an article that you think is good, inviting people to a session that you're doing in your library, inviting people to an advocacy event that you're having, and inviting them to collaborate in Facebook itself as well as on Cite. For years, I've been hearing people talk about hybrid learning, hybrid teaching, and all these other things, where the model, I think, is a really primitive one. In learning, we may have you do a module, and then you take a quiz, and then you go to a classroom and you discuss it, and then you go back online and you do something, and it's just very mechanical. The things I've been playing with for over 10 years now, and I think Zoom has made it so much easier, is to have events if you have the technology, and all it takes is a laptop, proper lighting in a room, and a laptop that hooks up to your PA system, and an internet connection. You can have a meeting that has people in a room communicating with people on their laptops all across the country and all across the world. So you want to do something on Facebook, use the Facebook live streaming kind of thing, and have a good moderator who can block out the stuff when it gets trollish. You know, if somebody goes beyond your guidelines and they're engaging in behavior that's disruptive rather than constructive, make it clear to them that's not what we're here to do, and that's not what we're going to put up with. And if somebody continues, you just don't let them stay in that room. Monitor that conversation, have it open and honest, but make sure that there is a level of civility that works. But staying on the idea of writing, if I'm writing a post for Facebook, I'll generally start off with something that says what I'm trying to address, and then summarize it in a couple lines, and then invites people, come to this meeting, or respond here, or talk to each other, or share this with others, but always include a point of action. The same thing is true for LinkedIn, for Instagram, and TikTok. They're just different media, and we have to remember each one is a little different. Facebook tends to be more for social sharing of things, but there's no reason why you can't use it for advocacy, or as I do, use it for training, teaching, learning. LinkedIn, most people, I think, tend to think of that as a place you go if you want to find a job. And they overlook the fact that that's a place where you connect with your colleagues at a professional level. And if your advocacy involves colleagues in different industries, that's a great place to post a resource or an invitation to a meeting or a discussion of something you said and invite people to talk back and forth with you. Going to Instagram, remember that starts with photos, with images. So we're flipping it. With Facebook and LinkedIn, I think initially of writing some text and then having an image to go with it, although people oftentimes will take a picture and then write something around it. But recognize with Instagram, the image is the strong point. So you have to start with something that shows what you're trying to get to. Again, if we take something simple like lunch at the library, or that librarian we were talking about it earlier in a rural area who has those children who may go home after the library closed on Friday and not have any food until Monday, you want to have an image that's strong and positive and points out what the library means to them and says, you could be part of this. So you start with your image, you write a little bit of text, and you have your image in, and then you go for it. And with TikTok, full disclosure, I'm not a TikTok user. I love looking at some of the stuff my colleagues do there, but I can't tell you, here's how you do an effective TikTok, other than to say, again, it's video, it's media, it's moving media. So get images that are strong and playful, and get things that work to reach your audience at a level that they're open to being reached at, and deliver your messages that way. These are all ways for us to be social. And I would maintain to you, a key point here is advocacy is a social event. It is a social endeavor. We're trying to bring people together to produce what we consider positive results. In our splintered world these days, many of us disagree with what a positive result is. But the more we talk to each other, and the more importantly that we listen to each other, the closer we're going to come to writing effective pieces. Moving over to websites, again, brief, visually engaging, easy to navigate. If you want to use your website to get people involved in advocacy, make sure that there's a site on your home page that leads them right to your advocacy page that makes it clear. You look at the CLA site, and there is a tab right up front that talks about advocacy and takes you into that. If instead that site were to incorrectly have things set up so it says, here's about CLA, here's our events, here's an other thing, and then you look at the other and it's got 20 tabs, and then it leads you to something else, and at the end of that, 5 or 6 steps later, you're at the advocacy page. Nobody's going to stick with you. So again, a basic pointer on writing as well as putting it out on a web page. Make sure that your writing is pithy and has images that draw people in, but also make sure that it's easily accessible. People should not have to go searching for it. And when you're writing your text, make sure that you're using words that search engine optimization will pick up. So when somebody goes to Google CLA and advocacy, the language on your page is such that the algorithms will lead somebody right to the CLA advocacy pages or the Ursula Meyer page, if that's what we're trying to do. These are all things that you do, and they don't take a lot of work, but it does take a lot of thought. Amrit says, I'll add with the website, add accessibility features, which are now widely available. Absolutely. Think about who you're missing. If you're not accessible, who are you missing, and what is that doing to hurt your cause? And then plug that gap. If you don't know how to do it, find somebody who does. That's 2 wins. You find somebody who can help you out, and you draw more people into your cause. I ran volunteer services for the public library in San Francisco for upwards of 14 years. And the basic thing I always wanted to do was find an opportunity for people to do something meaningful in our organization. And if I could not, I didn't waste their time. I would say, we don't have anything like what you're looking for, but here's a place called the Volunteer Center, which has thousands of volunteer opportunities. Go over there and they'll help you. It's sort of like Miracle on 34th Street, where somebody sends somebody to a different department store. If you can't put an advocate to work for on behalf of your organization, you can always send them somewhere else. But before you do that, make sure you've explored all their interests and that you're not missing something that they have for you. So we've talked about emails, the headers, and the content, including using images. We talked about social media, where again, combining text and images is really important. And you just identify for yourself up front, does my social media platform emphasize the images like Instagram does? Does it emphasize videos like TikTok does? Or does it start with text like Facebook and LinkedIn primarily do, but also include the possibility of images? Now be aware of what most of us can tell from the algorithms that are not fully explained to us. It does appear that if you have a picture with your text on Facebook, it gets a lot more spread than just text only. Now let's see, Amrit's got a note coming in here, but I'm going to defer just a little bit more. So you've talked websites, reports. Again, if you're publishing reports to your audience and your prospective members, like an annual report or a quarterly thing, or even a newsletter, you want to make sure that that's a good combination of short, punchy text, short sentences, vibrant sentences, images that play off that, and keep people involved. Lots of stories, more stories, great graphics, and brevity. That's what makes a report and a newsletter fly. And somebody mentioned a little earlier, press releases. I think we may have done that before we started the recording today. Press releases can be used for advocacy because you're getting the word out through the media contacts you have that you're doing something. It could be as simple as an announcement of a rally. It could be an announcement of an initiative you're doing. If we use our wonderful colleagues at every library, they're constantly putting stuff out that goes to the media, that goes to their supporters, that goes to their prospective supporters. And if we're missing that and we're not using our writing skills there, we're missing something important. Nicole.
I have a question about when you're writing, like finally transitions into the one-on-one. So let's say you write a really good email and they want to follow up with you and they have questions or concerns, or your advocacy is against their agenda. How do you balance like the personalities and egos when you're advocating in that position? And you want to advocate for your library's needs. And you may not necessarily change their mind, but you don't want to make the damage worse and bruise an ego or like have a personality conflict.
I'm sharing several levels of conversation. Let me take the most obvious one, which is, working with egos. If we're talking about our egos, we need to check our egos and our feelings at the door as much as possible, which sounds contradictory when I'm talking about being passionate. But you can be passionate and at the same time not take stuff personally, as difficult as that is. This gets us into a whole different subject, which is conflict resolution. But the one sentence explanation of conflict resolution in this setting of setting aside your ego and setting aside your anger is, don't take it personally, because oftentimes the criticism or the insults coming your way are not directed at you. They're directed at the idea that you represent. And if you can separate that a little bit, not take it personally, that makes you much more effective in finding a rational, positive way to respond to even the most trollish and nasty comments that come your way. That doesn't mean you have to take abuse. You can always cut off a conversation quickly and say, look, I'm here to talk about this. We're not going to engage in name calling. We're not going to insult each other's intelligence or lack thereof. We're really on this issue. And if that's not where we can talk, then I'm going to suggest that we stop this conversation and come back to it when we're both a little cooler. Think of Derek. He didn't hear the Proud Boys were coming to disrupt his event and barricade the doors and called the police in. Derek went and met him in the parking lot and talked to them. That's setting your ego aside, but maintaining your passion and also maintaining the obvious commitment you have to listening to different perspectives. In almost every session I do, and if you come to Ursula Meyer things, you've heard me say this many times, I love the book by Jeff Cohen, which is called Belonging. You should have that on your library shelves, and you should take it off the shelf and read it if you haven't already, because he talks explicitly in there about the idea that if we're trying to actually change people's minds, we're wasting our time. That's not where the real action is. It gets to the heart of what I think Nicole's asking. We're not trying to change everybody's mind. We're trying to, as much as we can, diffuse the anger and the divisiveness that exists there. So by listening and showing respect, sometimes we may not change minds, but we can lessen the opposition. That's not going to disappear, but it can somehow bring us closer to actually being able to have reasonable discussions. Nicole, does that address what you were talking about?
That's wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that insight.
Welcome. Again, Jeffrey Cohen, Belonging, such a wonderful, wonderful book. I'll keep plugging that until somebody writes a better book. Amrit and Sarah both have wonderful things in the chat. I'm going to defer to you and let you read those into the official record here. Go ahead.
So mine is just a summary of all the things we've covered. We have pro tip 2, an explanation of what the problem is in 1 or 2 sentences, not a book. Pro tip 3, a proposed solution. Pro tip 4, an invitation to be part of a solution. We have some other notes on writing on various platforms for email. Remember that the pitch goes in the subject line of the email. On social media, ask, what are you trying to address? A good post engages people in conversation and includes a call to action. For LinkedIn, consider engaging colleagues across different industries in advocacy. For Instagram, remember that the image is the strong point. Pick an image that communicates you can be part of this. Use limited text. In TikTok, moving images are fun and engaging. For websites, be visually engaging. Remember, advocacy is a social event. And also ask yourself, who are you missing? And how are you hurting your cause? The next post is a summary from a previous webinar with Patrick Sweeney, which included book recommendations. The first one is a link to Belonging, Science Creating Connection. We have Tyranny of the minority in American democracy, rules for radicals, words that work, the political mind, and the victory lab. And then there are some comments here from Sarah that she might be interested in reading into the record.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you so much, Amrit.
I was just gonna say, Paul, when you said social media is social, I actually felt like my heart rate go up for a second because of how striking that was. I feel like I'm often screaming into the void about how different social media platforms are and how you can't just have one post you copy paste onto every single platform. And it's so reassuring to hear someone else talk about that difference, because there's a reason these platforms are different. There's a reason that they have different content. And that's because they attract different audiences. Different types of people interact on those social media platforms. So when you enter a new social media platform, you have to conform to their norms and what does well in their environment. You can't just be like, oh, I made a Facebook post and I made this image for it, haha, copy paste that into every social media platform. It doesn't work. And what I've observed as a social media user is that library workers and people who are constantly in an interacting role like customer service tend to do the best on TikTok because they're adaptive and they are interacting with people frequently enough that they can pick up on the trends that occur on those social media platforms, as opposed to like bookstores or major companies that exist within, like, they have to fit their PR rules, they have to fit their marketing rules. And so they end up trying to mimic what trends, but it's always a little too late, or very telling that they don't actively use that platform, or it almost catches users off guard of like, oh, this is a brand. Like, we know immediately, you clock it immediately, and you just swipe away because I know you're trying to sell me something. So it's fascinating. Like, it's reassuring to hear when other people observe that, because I feel like a lot of people put social media in this one umbrella term and think, oh, we just have to be trending on social media. We just have to do that, and our problems are solved. We just have to be trending. And it's like, that means something so differently on every single platform. A TikTok trend is very different from a Facebook trend, and a LinkedIn trend, because LinkedIn is social media, is very different from an email or even how we interact in our professional lives. So it's like, wanting to build on that and wanting to expand on that is something I'm really passionate about. And it's almost like I feel like I'm screaming about it all the time, and people are just like, yeah, copy paste, done.
See, the trick is, and again, it comes to the essence of what we're working on today together. Are we just throwing things into the wind and screaming and raging, or are we trying to invite people to engage? Because advocacy is there to try to produce some sort of what we perceive to be a positive change. And screaming doesn't do that.
Right. And something I've picked up on is that being active on those social media platforms, like, you can't just post something and walk away. Like, it leads back into that social media is social. You have to be engaging in the comments. You have to be talking about that item multiple times. I remember when TikTok first started to get big, I had a friend who was determined to become TikTok famous. And she was like, in order to appeal to the algorithm, you have to be posting 3 times a day minimum, and they have to be a certain amount of length, and that takes a lot of energy and a lot of work to build. You need designated people to do that, and that takes resources and additional finances in order to accomplish those things. So I can understand a lot of the restraint and a lot of the reasons why people have difficulty establishing social media presence, or even difficulty focusing on more than one. But it comes down to that, like, they are different, and we need to be able to recognize that.
Nicole, I think we're picking up background conversation from you. So if you don't mind muting until you finish that conversation, that would be great. Sarah, thanks. Wonderful observations there. And it comes back to something that I think helps us to more effectively approach social media. I learned a long time ago, when I was averse to going on Twitter, when it was still Twitter, that as soon as I found a reason that it could be useful in the work I do, then I was all over it. But we don't need to be on every platform. We certainly don't need to be on 24/7. One of the best people I knew at the national level who was using Twitter in training circles seemed to be on all the time. And I asked her, how do you do that? She says, oh, I'm on 10 or 15 minutes a day. I just go in, I skim, I respond to a few things. I make sure that they are the responses that will reach the largest possible audience, and I move on to something else. I thought, what a refreshing assurance that being a social media user doesn't have to mean 24/7. In fact, I firmly subscribe to something that an academic here in the San Francisco Bay Area talked about years ago. Taking a break from social media, even if it's just a few hours once a week or a day once a week, can be very refreshing because you walk away from it, focus on other things, and then come back refreshed and ready to engage. Anybody else, comments or questions based on what we've had? And I think there are a few more messages that have come in on chat. Let's see what's going on there. Nothing that we need to read into the record. Thanks, Nicole. So we have talked about the different platforms, and I sort of gave you a preview of coming attractions as we move into the workshopping. Again, the 4 steps, the way I've written them out, slightly different than what's I'm recaptured there, but these are the explicit ways I would say if you're going to take 4 steps, think of an elevator speech as your format. The elevator speech is something you do in 30 seconds to get somebody intrigued, engaged, and invite further conversation. So step 1 of 4 is think of how you write your first line as the way news writers write the leads in their news writing stories. You're outlining the problem and the challenge in one line. And that's a lot harder than it sounds. Sometimes that one line can take you a half hour or an hour, or time spent over a few days as you go back and you reword things, or you look at your whole presentation and you figure out, my key line is buried in sentence 5 or 6, not in the first paragraph. For me, that first step of using the leads in news writing as your starting point, outlining the problem and the challenge, goes back to something I learned when I was in college on the school paper. And I still remember and credit the wonderful advisor we had, John Fleischman. John suggested that writing a news story was like boxing or prize fighting. You land a punch and you land another and you land another. And when you're done, you just leave. You don't try to wrap it all up pretty. You just keep punching. And the theory here, which I think is based in a lot of fact from years and years of news writing and reading newspaper articles, is people will generally read the first line of an article, and then about 50% of your audience bails if we're talking about reading. And then that 50% that's left, half of them will read the second line and then go. So you've got to be very strong in your first couple lines. And then after that, keep the content going. When you run out of things to say, stop, because they're going to stop before you do. So I still love John. I talk to him every once in a while about that lesson he talked about. Your first line is your killer line. It's got to be a strong punch that invites people to remain engaged. Reading from a couple sources I want to quote to you, and I'll put into the chat at the end of this list of some of the books I drew from. But one of the best books I've read in terms of storytelling, which I think guides us well in writing, is from Meg Bowles and her colleagues, who wrote a book about how the Moth Radio Hour crafts its stories. Highly recommend the book to you. Let me get the title for you so that in case I forget to put that in later, you've got it. It's Meg Bowles, Catherine Burns, Jennifer Hickson, Sarah Austin-Jennis, and Kate Teller's. Title is How to Tell a Story. Full title after the colon, How to Tell a Story, The Essential Guide to Memorable Storytelling for the Moth. Here's a couple of guidelines from Meg and her colleagues. Pages 10 to 11. Some of the best nights at the Moth can be seen as though the storyteller and everyone in the audience are breathing the same breath. With each story, every brain in the room fires together. The hearts share the beats per minute. And here's where I think it gets interesting, because now we get into the neurology, the physical reactions we have to good storytelling and good writing. Imagine how excited we were when we learned that this feeling is backed up by science. A study led by neuroscientist Uri Hasson found that when a person is listening and comprehending a story, their brain activity begins to couple or align with the brain of the teller. The scientific term is speaker-listener neural coupling. MRI scans of 2 brains, one talking, one listening, shows that the brains begin to sync. And we want to strive for that in our writing too. We want to be so compelling that the reader starts to sync with us and wants to be part of us. That's our invitation to them. So again, that's some of the theory behind Moth storytelling, and we can adapt that into our own writing. That first line has to be the winner that pulls them in. Carrying over to another book that I'm really fond of, Will Storr's book. The last name is S-T-O-R-R, The Science of Storytelling. He looks at the neurology behind how we react to it and builds a lot more into that book than what Meg and her colleagues do in the Moth book. He starts off on page 11 by saying, many stories begin with a moment of unexpected change. And that's how they continue too. You can see the importance. The examples we had at the beginning of the webinar, or the workshop we're doing here online today, were people coming up with a line that invited us to engagement and enticed us in. It's the moment of unexpected change. 2 pages later in the book, Storr says, unexpected change is a portal through which danger arrives to swipe at our throats. Paradoxically, however, and he's talking about storytelling, but I think it applies to advocacy very well here. Paradoxically, however, change is also an opportunity. It's the crack in the universe through which the future arrives. Change is hope. Change is promise. It's our winding path to a more successful tomorrow. When unexpected change strikes, we want to know, what does it mean? Is this change for the good or the bad? Unexpected change makes us curious, and curious is how we should feel in the opening movements of an effective story. I wish I could write like that. It's just beautiful. That's what we want to strive for. Do you see how Storr, in talking to other storytellers and talking about how our mind works, himself advocates for great storytelling? There's a subtlety there to what he's talking about that is a great model for all of us. We don't have to hit people over the heads. We need to draw them in. And good, clean storytelling, subject, verb, object is the key to it. Look for a couple of other notes, and then finally we'll get to the workshopping, which we want to do so you've got something to walk out of here with. Again, going back to Storr's book, page 28, according to neuroscientist Benjamin Bergen, we start modeling words as soon as we start reading them. We don't wait until we get to the end of the sentence. This means the order in which writers place their words matters. This is perhaps why transitive construction, sorry for the grammatical lesson here, this is why transitive construction, Jane gave a kitten to her dad, is more effective than the detransitive, Jane gave her dad a kitten. Picturing Jane, then the kitten, then her dad mimics a real world action. Again, Jane gave a kitten to her dad instead of Jane gave her dad a kitten. It mimics the action, and it mimics the real world action that we as readers should be modeling. It means we're mentally experiencing the scene in a correct sequence. Because writers are in effect generating neural movies in the minds of their readers, they should privilege the word order that's filmic. Imagine how their reader's neural camera will alight along each component of a sentence. And then he talks about metaphor too, and he gives us a great example on page 45. In The Big Sleep, metaphor enables Raymond Chandler to pack a ton of meaning into just 7 words. Dead men are heavier than broken hearts. Okay, so he's writing mysteries and he's being very flowery and literary, but there's no reason why we can't draw metaphor into our work. Feeding children is like stoking civic engagement. It builds connections. Off the top of my head, just riffing off Chandler and Storr here, but that's what we can do in our writing. Layla, welcome to the session. We've gone through a lot in this already about the mechanics of writing and the theory of writing and looking at platforms. And we're really at this point going to get into taking some of the things we've had, but stick with us. Let's workshop it a little bit. What I'm going to suggest is that we take about 5 minutes, or tell me when you're done with this exercise, but I'm going to guess it's going to take you about 5 minutes. For those of you that have been with me the whole session, take the initial theme you outlined at the beginning of our session in our pre-recording conversation, write up a 3 or 4 line thing that could go into an email or into a newsletter or into something else where you're reaching out to your potential audience, and follow that format. And the first line lays out the problem, the second lays out a potential solution, third lays out what the person can do, and the fourth is the invitation. And let's see what we come up with. For those of you watching this, you can go ahead and freeze the recording at this point, because I'm going to see if I can, actually I can't. So when I give Karen the signal, Karen, I'm going to ask you to pause this, and we'll pause it while people work, and then we'll unpause it to come back. So those of you watching the recording, it's just going to be like the seamless, all right, stop, then start. Those of you in the session, we'll have a few minutes of silence for you to do that. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them. So Karen, go ahead and pause now. Or whenever you're ready. Or if not able to pause, we'll just keep going. But everybody, go ahead and start working on this. And if we can edit this a little bit and pause the recording long enough to omit that from the YouTube version of this. We'll go ahead. So you're on. I'll time us here. We're at about 14 minutes after the hour. At 19 minutes after the hour, we'll come back and we'll debrief this and then do a final thing. Right, those are magic. Those of you watching the recording, that was about 5 minutes in the last few seconds where Karen was nice enough to pause the recording so that our people in the live session could do their first draft here. All right, so we lost a couple of people who had to run off to other meetings, but we have Nicole, Amrit, and Robin. What I'm going to suggest is whoever's brave and has no ego about this, read us your 4 lines, and then other people comment at 2 levels. Talk about what you liked about it first. I think it's really important in saying, hey, this worked for me. And then if you have any suggestions, adopt a model of, if I were doing this, I might change that, or I might do this instead of telling somebody you should do this, or that was all wrong. But let's see what we can do so that you walk away with a first draft and the beginnings of a strong second draft, so you can use this thing sooner than later. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first,
Thank you, Robin.
only because I didn't get very far. And that
Okay.
way I can maybe just and sit back and listen to everybody else. But here's the thing, this is a new idea for me. I mean, I recently, in the last just literally week and a half, 2 weeks, I found out this information, and then something sparked in me to do something. So it's not fully matured in me yet, but you were talking, I really believe in that powerful tagline or that first sentence, because that's what captures me, right? And so my case was that we're a community of 179,000 people. Our city council the new budget only puts $20,000 for new books to the library. So that comes out to 11 cents per capita. It's hard to wrap your mind around that, right? So my tagline was something like, your literary needs are worth 11 cents. And then I'd put insert in our city. Or your city says you are worth 11 cents. Or something around 11 cents, right?
That is gorgeous. And I will tell you before we go any further, for 14 years, I ran the staff training, well, actually the volunteer services program.
Oh, thanks,
For
Emery.
half that period, I was also running the staff training thing. So volunteer services, staff training together. And all the time I was there, we didn't have budget cuts, because anytime the leaders of San Francisco City County government came and said, everybody has to cut 10%, I would do exactly what you did. And I would come up with something graphic. And one year I remember it was like, take a dollar bill and rip it into 100 pieces if that's physically possible. Now try to rip each of those 100 pieces into 100 pieces. And one of those little pieces is what our training budget is in the whole city county budget. It's like 11 cents, folks. That's ridiculous. It took that kind of graphic storytelling you just engaged in to successfully keep budgets going. So keep going. What's the rest of your pitch?
I wrote, again, remember, this is still maturing in me.
Mhm.
The timeliness of this workshop was serendipitous for me. I was like, I need to do this. So thank you. I mean, the timing was good. The other things I wrote was, a library without books is just a nice building. And my emphasis was, obviously we cannot, our library is something like 65,000 square feet, $20,000 for new books. That doesn't even fill, a couple stacks of books. So anyways, that's as far as I got. A library without books is just a building. Books are integral to libraries. Your city says you're worth 11 cents, and your literary needs are worth 11 cents per person in our city, or per capita, or whatever you want to use.
Great. Nicole and Amrit, reactions.
I've got a reaction, which is I love it. So good.
I'm still stuck on the 11 cents. I love it too. I
It's
like
so
imagine
good.
you showing up and passing out a dime and a penny to everybody in the room.
The thing I would wonder about is about Paul's question, ask yourself, who are you missing and how is that hurting your cause? When you say the city says you're worth 11 cents, you're not including the city as part of the people who this would benefit. You know, you're doing a us versus them. Is
Mhm.
there a way to rephrase that so the city is not the enemy, but the city is the partner? Or could it be something like,
Well,
it's
let me
to
ask you a
help the
question.
city?
And I'm actually friends with one of our city councilmen who used to be a library board trustee, so it's kind of shocking that this went through. I guess my bold comment would be they are kind of the enemy. I mean, they vote the budget, but I don't want to call them enemies because we're all citizens together. But in this context, they kind of are.
How about this? Join the city. Or join the people in the city who agree that we are worth more than 11 cents, or something where it's hard. I can't do it. I'm not able to do it right now on the spot, and you might not be able to, but I'm just wondering if that one piece could be a little
no.
less adversarial, so it's
I was just
more
going to say
inclusive.
that.
Yeah,
Emery, you had my eyes on this, looking at it more adversarial. That's the word. We are, and it could be turned around like we are worth more than 11 cents or something like that.
perfect.
But I like that. Thank you for that observation. I'm writing it down right now.
I like though that
Don't
the
be
way you
surprised if I go to a city council meeting and I give everybody 11 cents.
I do like though
You have the
that the way
budget for
you had
that?
it first.
It'll be my personal donation towards, because we get like 20 people at a city council meeting, so I think I can swing it.
$3 investment in your cause.
Uh-huh,
That's good.
uh-huh.
Putting your money where your mouth is.
Uh-huh.
Nicole
Robin,
had
if
something
I
she
could
wanted.
just add one thing, the way you had it the first time, what I love is it had a call to action, tell the city. Is there a way to move the call to action to another place? So it's not the pitch, but it's the invitation then. Just a thought.
That's a great point. That's the last line. And you know, now you have a framework. You start off with, we're worth more than 11 cents. Join us in telling the city we're worth more than 11 cents. That's how these things get written in first draft and second draft form. A tip to everybody, we are so worried about coming up with perfect things that we think our first draft has to be perfect. Annie Lamott, in her wonderful book, Bird by Bird, which is all about how writers write their novels, talks about taking it step by step, or literally the story she tells her is taking a school report on birds, bird by bird. So if we start off with something and then we can frame it around a thing where the theme gets repeated at the end of 4 lines, that's really effective storytelling, whether it's posted on Facebook or an annual report or an email to prospective supporters. Nicole, you wanted to add something there.
I was thinking if it doesn't have to be adversarial, would it be insulting or sarcastic? Because if it would be, I wouldn't say it, to ask, in 2024, what can you buy for 11 cents? And then talk
No.
about all the things the library does for just 11 cents. And it's like, but imagine how much more we could do if we had more than 11 cents.
Right. Now, this is not good. I like that too. And also, this is not library operations budget. This is just the book budget. So
Nicole
they
makes a
do
good
give
point,
money, of
and
course.
it goes beyond an elevator speech. The good point is put it in the context of all the things we do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
on the issue we're talking about, which is what we're going to focus on in our elevator speech, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's in an email, the context is really important. And here is the thing we're facing right now. 11 cents doesn't buy much, but we're being told that it's enough to buy books for you in a library over a year-long period of time. By the way, when was the last time you got a book for 11 cents?
I don't even know if that buys 20 blank pages of paper.
That doesn't even buy a postage stamp to mail you a book if the book were light enough to put one stamp on it.
It costs more than that to photocopy something in your copy machine.
Yes, good point.
And these are all things that you develop, you know, we're focusing obviously today on the written form of this, but these are things that we focus to integrate our writing into our spoken presentations. I didn't even talk at all about writing for PowerPoint slides. You know, with PowerPoint decks, when I use them, 3 to 5 words as a headline and then an image. And all my things that most people put in bullet points, I put in speaker notes. So if somebody wants to look at the deck later, it's all there. But the deck is not the speech. The deck is a supporting message. So if we're writing for PowerPoint slides, we want to write very pithy, focused things that support what we're talking about and reach an audience at a very emotional level. Robin, do you have any questions for Amrit or Nicole about their comments or about next steps in honing your written pitch?
No, I mean, I've been taking copious notes. Like I said, this is just beginning, but I really appreciate Emery and Nicole's observations, and I'm going to just sit back and listen.
It's a great start, and it's a reminder to all of us. That's where we're at when we start to draft our advocacy pitches. We may go through 5 or 10 iterations. Some of us are constantly making new iterations of everything we do. I don't give the same speech or the same presentation. That's clear from the way this ran today. I had a basic outline, and I had our goals and objectives that I wanted to make sure we met, but I certainly didn't read and write every word based on everything I've ever done before. It's the same thing in advocacy. It's always reacting to what's going on in the moment and to the audience you're working with and the needs of that audience, as well as your own needs. Now if you're looking at a clock, you're probably figuring it's over now. We started the recording about 10 minutes late. So if you can hang in there another 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to go the full 90 minutes of recording for the episode. And that way we get a full debrief of the other things. Nicole or Amrit, which of you wants to go next with your pitch?
Amrit, you can go.
Actually was creating bib records during that time for CLA, so cannot participate in this exercise. How about you, Nicole?
See, I went blank, so then I went, of course, to my default, the sappy woe is me approach. And so, because you know how Paul says personal stories. And so, and I wasn't quite sure what to say by 5 sentences or 5 points. So I wrote, being sent to a foster home in deep East Oakland literally saved my life. I know that deep East Oakland gets a bad rap for being a bad neighborhood, but my sanctuary was those streets and the local library. And then right there, I was like, everybody deserves a quality library, not just a place to stay alive, but a place to reach their fullest potential and to learn and grow. But every library in our neighborhood isn't at the state of high quality. And I'm inviting you to help me change that. So see, I went straight for the sappiness, like, oh, what was her, you know?
The thing here is we want to get away from the judgmental things of thinking that our writing is sappy or maudlin. I mean, we watch for that. But when you speak from the heart, that's generally, if it's effective, it's going to override any of that. And if anybody looks at you and says, oh, that was maudlin, that was sappy, I would ask them to go to their heart surgeon and see if they lost their heart somewhere along the line. Because to me, that's so full of heart and so full of caring and so full of community building that you got me. But I'm not the one you're trying to please here. I'm reading Robin. What are your reactions to what Nicole said?
Quick first last time, so Robin, if you'd like to.
Go ahead, Emery.
I just think that was great because you told a story. You know, one of Paul's tips here was tell your story in 2 to 3 sentences, not a book. In political campaigns, this is what we call the origin story. And the origin story is, why do you even care about this? And why should we care about what you're saying? And you pulled us in immediately. It's a story no one else can tell. It is your origin story. And the invitation to join was friendly. How can someone not want to join that? And then you outlined the problem very well, which is everyone deserves a good library, a sanctuary. In selling the solution, you also sold a vision of people expanding and growing and learning. So I think that was excellent. If there's anything that could be changed, it would be, I think, making the description of the childhood experience maybe just like one sentence shorter. But that matched the formula perfectly.
First of all, I mean, I love listening to your voice. You're so articulate. You're a good storyteller yourself. Nicole, I really enjoyed that as well. My quick little story with that is, I don't know, 2024? So 24 years ago, I was new in a second career in libraries. And I went to this kind of event where we just built a new library in a community that the old library happened was in a real a factory that made dolls, believe it or not. And then the county built a library in that factory, and we finally built a new library. So we were giving a special event for press and community leaders. And I didn't know much about the literacy program per se, especially in that community. We were a county library that had a lot of different types of libraries. And so the literacy coordinator for that library had a literacy student come and speak. And the fact that I still remember it 24 years later tells me that it was impactful. But she was a woman, and her literacy goals were to be able to read the bus schedule so that she can go to work. And are you kidding me? Like, she didn't need to read the bestseller. She didn't need to, she had the specific goal of having the ability to read the bus schedule so that she can get to work. And her message obviously has stayed with me all this time. And I just think that was more powerful than anything that I could have read about why we should support literacy in libraries. And I think personal stories can be so effective for that reason.
Well, any questions for the people that you just heard from? It's a beautiful piece. It's a great first draft. I can hardly wait to see the second and third. I want to see it roll out.
I'll put it in the crock pot. I'll have to get brave enough to actually say it outside of a classroom setting, because it does invite a lot of questions that I don't feel like answering. So
You don't
I
have
get
to
that.
answer questions about your experience. Just because you share a piece of your life doesn't mean all of you is up for public consumption. You're allowed to be boundaried when you're doing advocacy work.
agreed, and I don't even want to answer those questions, because after a while you seem disingenuous, like you made it up.
Congrats. Thank you.
And that is one of those things I just don't want to do.
Thank you all for
Nicole, that's really-
Oh, go ahead, Robin.
I was just gonna say that's really powerful what you said, because it is a vulnerable state you put yourself into when you do that storytelling. In fact, there's a new documentary out. I just read a little blurb from the one of the producers, and saying that, I don't remember the documentary, it just came out, and it said something like he chose not even to tell the full story because he didn't think it'd be he thought people would think it would be unbelievable if he told the full story of what the experience was. And I've never heard a documentarian say that. Like, it was so moving and unbelievable that they left stuff out. And yeah, storytelling is interesting.
I understand exactly what he's saying. If I were to write my legit biography, I'd publish it under fiction because it's like, no, no one's going to believe that. Because as I told my therapist, after a while, people are like, if you want to write a book, just say that. It's like, because it sounds like you're just, trauma dumping just to like write a book. So that's why I'm like trying to work on, it's going to take time, passionate statements that aren't personal. Like, I do like the 11 cents idea. That's not personal. That's not your life or anything, but that's a real honest, true thing to talk about. And I don't want to drag the other children into it, because that's not my business and that's not fair. It's like, how can I get that personal angle to advocate for my library without defaulting to my woe is me story? Because my woe is me story works, I promise. But after a while, it's just going to be tiresome.
We've had 3 very different stories told here, along with the ones I told up front. And I think the point to be made here is no format trumps every other format. No approach trumps every other format. If Nicole is interested and comfortable telling some of her personal story to draw people into advocacy, that works. If Amrit and Robin have different approaches to it and it draws people in, that works. We always have to ask ourselves, like we do at the beginning of a training session, what do we want to do differently? What do we want to see change because we were here together? And if that guides us and we can measure our successes by that, doesn't matter how we did it. What matters is the positive results we produce. All right, a little bit of a footnote here. We talked about several things throughout the session books. I put it into the chat for those that are in the live session. I'm going to do a very quick skim and read of this for people that are watching the video in case you want further references. So I would start with the Will Storr book, The Science of Storytelling, because it tells us how people react to stories and how our brains react. And I think that's seminal information if you want to know how to approach people. And this, on the side of things, looking at using images with your stories, Gar Reynolds has a wonderful book called Presentation Zen, subtitle Simple Ideas on Presentation Design and Delivery. So Gar Reynolds' book on Presentation Zen is a great way to look at how to incorporate images into storytelling. Annie Lamott mentioned her book Bird by Bird as one of the things that just tells you how to write step by step and be effective. Chip and Dan Heath, we didn't talk at all about, but their book Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die, is really good background in terms of if you're going to write, what kind of stories do you tell and how do you tell them in a way that makes them memorable? We talked about the Moth book by Meg Bowles and her colleagues, How to Tell a Story, the Essential Guide to Memorable Storytelling from the Moth. Again, what draws us in? What makes us feel like we have the shared experience with the speaker and we want to be part of their gang? Chris Anderson's book, TED Talks, the official TED Guide to Public Speaking, takes us a few steps away from writing, but it talks about the process of crafting an effective TED Talk. And if you've gone through that and you watch some TED Talks, it's great information to carry you into your own storytelling. And finally, if you want stories, examples of stories told by advocates, the book I did for Roman and Littlefield, Change the World Using Social Media, has lots of stories about advocates in libraries and outside of libraries, and talks about some of the major people that we've seen in this country over the last 10 years, how they advocated for their communities and how they did it. And when you read those stories, you start doing what I think Nicole is doing, applying that back to your own life and saying, what part of my story is universal enough to draw other people in? So thank you all for a very lively session. I'm going to say to Nicole, I can hardly wait to be at CLA with you because I want to hear some of these stories that are never going to make it into the book, but that I've never heard from you. That's going to be a nice dinner. Pitch to all of you. This is August of 2024 when we're recording this. If you're seeing this before October, please sign up and attend with us the CLA conference in Pasadena this year. A bunch of us are going to be doing a half-day workshop on library advocacy basics. And I have 2 other shorter workshops going that are already on the calendar. So hope to see you there. If you see any of us in the hallways, stop us and say hello, pick our brains, let us pick your brains. We need you. You're our community. You're what makes writing advocacy pitches and advocacy stories effective and meaningful. So best of luck to you for the rest of your day, the rest of your week, wherever you are. Hope to see you again soon. With that, I'm going to ask Karen to cut the recording. And those of you who are still on the call, if you want to stay for a quick debrief, feel free to do that. Take care, everybody.
I gotta run